Hey, good morning, everybody. So we've made it to chapter 10 of Frendel. In the last chapter called Chess, we kind of saw a move made by Mrs. Granger of sending the principal, Mrs. Chatham, to Nick's house. Nick kind of sees this as a game on situation. In fact, he even stood up to his parents and told them, I'm not going to be disrespectful, but I'm also not going to stop this. He even said it's no longer his word, that it now belongs to everybody, and everybody likes using it, and there's nothing he can really do. The chapter we're going to read today is called Freedom of the Press. Press. Press is a word with multiple meanings. We may think of the word press as you press against something, like I press the door to make it open. In this case, press means like a newspaper or a magazine, some sort of writing that deals with journalism where people report on current events or news. Maybe you've seen your parents read the press, or maybe you yourself like to read the press. It means basically just reading something that has to do with the news. So, freedom of press. I'm wondering how the news may get involved with this story. Let's find out. Judy Morgan was a reporter for the Westfield Gazette, the local newspaper. Boom, we're right into it. Already introducing a new character, and they have to do with the news, which ties into the chapter title. Westfield was a quiet little town. There was the occasional burglary, the teenagers got rowdy once in a while, and there was some shouting at the town council or the planning board now and then. But mostly, things were calm and orderly in Westfield, and every Thursday the Westfield Gazette proved that. Calm town, not much happens. Ted Bell sold advertisements for the paper, and he had a daughter in fourth grade at Lincoln Elementary. He told Judy that a bunch of fifth graders were making trouble and were not obeying teachers anymore, that there was something about a secret code word they were all using. I wonder if Nick's word is going to become a little more famous by making it into the news. Let's see. And that half of the students have been kept after school one day last week, including his own little girl. The only other story Judy was working on was about 18 new trees that were going to be planted along East Main Street. The trees could wait. This thing at the elementary school sounded like a real story. So Judy Morgan showed up at Lincoln Elementary School at 3 o'clock the day after Mrs. Chatham had been to visit Nick's parents. The sign on the door said, "All visitors must report to the office." And she did. On the bulletin board outside the office, Judy saw Mrs. Granger's notice about the punishment for using the word frindle. She stepped back 2 paces, aimed her camera at the notice, and snapped a photo. She read the notice once more and then stepped into the office. Mrs. Freed, the school secretary, looked up and smiled. "May I help you?" "Yes, I am sure you can. My name is Judy Morgan, and I work for the Westfield Gazette. I'd like to know about the poster outside the office. The one with the word Frendel. Who should I talk to?" Mrs. Freed stopped smiling. She was sick and tired of anything to do with that word. For the past week, her phone had been ringing off the hook. If it wasn't a parent complaining about a child who had to stay after school, it was someone from the school board trying to get in touch with Miss Chatham or Mrs. Granger. Mrs. Freed pursed her lips, narrowed her eyes, and she said, "You'll have to speak to the principal. Let me see if Mrs. Chatham is free." She was. There isn't a principal alive who won't find the time to talk to someone from the local newspaper. The reporter was invited into Mrs. Chatham's office. Judy noticed right away that the principal was not comfortable talking about this stuff. When asked about the poster outside the office door, Mrs. Chatham laughed and said, "Oh, that. It's nothing really. Some kids have been playing a prank, and it was time to put a stop to it. Okay, so we're going to take a moment and talk for a second. I think it's interesting to pay attention when authors do something different. So far, the pattern of the book has been following Nick and Nick's actions. So far in this chapter, we haven't learned anything new about Nick or anything new that Nick's doing. In fact, we've only been following Judy, the reporter for the local newspaper. So our pattern has broken. Andrew Clements has broken what's been going on in the story to introduce a new character. And if he's taking the time to do that, it's usually for a good reason. Somehow this character is going to push us further up that plot mountain where we're going to feel the tension start to build. We're going to feel those problems get worse and worse and worse for some characters and maybe get better for other characters. I don't know yet. It could make things worse for everybody. But somehow, some way, this new character is going to push us up that plot mountain. And since I know how fiction stories usually go, I know things are going to get worse. So let's keep going. The principal's laugh sounded kind of phony to Judy Morgan. And did that notice put an end to the prank? I heard that a lot of children were kept here after school last week. Would you like to tell me about that? Parents would like to know what's going on. Mrs. Chatham looked like a kid who had just been sent to the principal's office. I love that. Again, classic Andrew Clements comedy. His humor comes through again. Mrs. Chatham is the principal, and yet, in this case, she looks like a kid that got sent to the principal. And we all know what that looks like. Unfortunately, if you've ever been in trouble, you know that kind of look you have on your face when you're taking that walk from your classroom to the principal's office. She squirmed a little in her chair and tried to smile. And she said, "Well, we do still have a little problem, but it's under control. Mrs. Granger may have overreacted a bit. I don't think the children have really been trying to be disrespectful. They're just having some fun, and it's more like a difference of opinion." And then Mrs. Chatham went on to tell the reporter that she knew about the word frindle and how it become popular among the students. Judy Morgan took careful notes. And when the principal had finished, Judy said, "Would you mind if I asked Mrs. Granger a few questions?" Mrs. Chatham said no, not at all. But Judy could tell the principal really wished she would just go away. What could she say, though? Mrs. Chatham couldn't very well keep the reporter away from Mrs. Granger because, well, after all, America is a free country with a free press. If Judy really wanted to, she would talk to Mrs. Granger, sooner or later. So in our country, we do have freedom of press. That means the newspapers, they are allowed to investigate and report on any topic. And so really, Mrs. Chatham can't really stop the reporter. So she's going to let her just go right ahead and talk to Mrs. Granger. It was sooner. In 3 minutes, Judy Morgan was standing at the doorway of room 12, looking in at Mrs. Granger. There were about 15 children sitting at desks, scattered around the room, busy writing out their 100 sentences. She knocked, and the teacher and the students looked up from their work. Lucky. Can't read a chapter without these dogs causing all this noise. I'm Judy Morgan from the Westfield Gazette, Mrs. Granger. May I have a word with you? She asked. Cana. I guess they're thirsty. Cana. So she has to have a word with Mrs. Granger. Mrs. Granger stood and came out into the hallway and closed the door. Judy could see past her and saw that every kid in the room was straightening up to listen. Judy noticed Mrs. Granger's eyes right away. Gray, maybe flecked with a little gold, and very sharp, but not hard or mean, just bright and strong. The reporter didn't waste words. So I hear that you plan to stop the students from using the new word. How goes the battle? Mrs. Granger did not smile, and her eyes got even brighter. First of all, it is not a battle. I am merely helping my students to see that this foolishness must stop. Such a waste of time and thought. There is no reason to invent a new word, a useless word. They should each learn to use the words we already have. But of course, all of this is just the silly fad. And when you add an E to fad, you get fade. And I predict that this fad will fade. So she thinks the fad will go away. People will get bored of using the word friendle, and that'll be that. Judy looked up from her notepad and asked, Any idea how it all got started? Ooh. Mrs. Granger's eyes seemed to almost catch on fire at that question, and she said, Oh, yes, I have a very good idea how it all got started. It was one young man's idea, a fifth-grade student named Nicholas Allen. And now you will have to excuse me, Miss Morgan, for I have papers I must grade. And with a brief, firm handshake, Mrs. Granger ended the interview. But the reporter didn't leave right away. She walked back through the hallway and sat on the bench outside the office so she could look over her notes to make sure they made sense. It took her about 5 minutes. Then Judy stood up, put her notebook into her large black purse, waved goodbye to the frowning Mrs. Freed, and headed out the door. Okay, we're going to stop there, although it's not the end of the chapter. I'm stopping there because it seemed like the first half of the chapter has been completed. What I mean is, it seems to me that Judy Morgan has spent her time talking to the adults involved with this battle, and maybe the second half of the chapter will be her talking to the students involved. So we're going to hold off on that for tomorrow. But I do want you to take notice of a new character and what they're going to bring to our story and moving us up the plot mountain, closer to the climax as our problem gets worse and worse and worse. And we could kind of feel that because really no adult was happy that she was there. Mrs. Freed was annoyed, Mrs. Chatham was worried, and Mrs. Granger seemed a little defensive, like she had to explain her actions. Well, we're going to see what happens in the second half of this chapter tomorrow.